Light from a Broken Lamp, written by M.A.Morales. Read by M.A.Morales. Chapter 1. "Thank you very much. Have a good night," Hannah said, with a smile as the last customer of the night walked out the front door of the bakery. The jingling of the bell sounded as the door closed behind him. Head in hands, she leaned on the glass-top counter and sighed. Hannah stared at the door for a few seconds before looking at the clock. "Just another day," she whispered to herself as she walked to the front door and flipped the sign to say closed. She glanced out the window and into the dark night, noticing the few people finishing their chores and work for the day before heading home. The lights at the florist shop turned off as she looked out, reminding her of her tasks before she was to leave. Hannah lightly stepped behind the counter and into the kitchen. She ensured all appliances were off, for unmonitored open flames were not welcome. Leaning across the counter, she shut the valve to the gas tank. She dampened a washcloth and wiped off the countertops and tables, and afterwards swept the floors. Simple and menial work, perhaps, but Hannah was content with the job. It was the family business, after all, handed down to her mother from her father and his father before him. Having survived generations, the family-owned bakery became a symbol of the traditional living style in the town of Wickborough. Even the late king acknowledged its meaning to the townspeople. Hannah gave the shop one last check before turning off the lights and locking the door. She could hear the bell ringing as she shut it tight and turned the knob, ensuring the door was sealed. She glanced around and stuck the keys in her pocket before heading home. The night air was refreshingly cool against her skin, for often the bakery became stuffy and hot. Hannah stared at the ground as she walked, jumping over the cracks in the sidewalk. No one paid her any attention, for they had places to be. As she walked under the light of a lamppost, Hannah smiled at her shadow. However, as she looked ahead, she frowned, seeing a blanket of darkness in front of her, separating her from the light of the next lamppost. "When are they going to fix that lamp?" Hannah mumbled to herself as she stepped into the shroud of darkness. Not that Hannah feared darkness, but it made her more alert, as if someone could see her through shadows without her being able to see them. After a few seconds, she re-entered the world of the light, where she once again felt safe. Not that Hannah distrusted the townspeople. She knew many of the families who worked and shopped in the marketplace. The ones she was not familiar were often the result of an intentional unfamiliarity. Hannah arrived at the street and stopped, looking both ways before making her way across. As she turned her head to the right, she noticed a few people in dark clothing gathered outside of the apothecary. The lights in the shop were on, for the store seemed to always be open. However, many of the townspeople avoided the apothecary, even switching to the other side of the road rather than walk past it. She curiously watched the group out of the corner of her eyes. After a few seconds, they grew silent, and she felt their penetrating glares on her. Hannah quickly turned away, not realizing she had made her way across the street. Her foot didn't lift high enough and jammed into the curb, causing her to stumble. The three individuals who were still watching her noticed and chuckled at the incident. Embarrassed, Hannah continued forward at a faster pace, being sure not to look back. When she arrived at her front door, Hannah fumbled with the keys, trying to find the right one and get inside as quickly as possible. Once unlocked, she quietly opened the door and poked her head through, hoping she hadn't woken anyone. She noticed a light on in the kitchen, but the rest of the house remained silent and at rest. "You're a bit late," her mother quietly stated as Hannah entered the kitchen, her investigation as to why the light remained on complete. Her mother continued to cut the strawberries and place them in a bowl, an empty jar waiting beside it. "Mr. Fletcher came in as I was about to close. Said he was running late. Well, I hope you running late doesn't mean you neglected to tidy before you left." "No, Mother." Her mother didn't look up, but continued to slice the red fruit. Hannah watched, her eyes looking as if she was in a daze. She played with the keys in her coat pocket before removing her hands and placing them on the back of the chair in front of her. She gazed at the clean tabletop, examining the quaint checkered pattern on the cloth and the vase of flowers located at the center. A tag hangs from the vase and says, "Wish I could be here. Love and miss you all. From your loving father." "Are these new?" Hannah asked as she ran her fingers along a petal. its smooth texture pleasing to her touch. Her mother looked up and smiled before returning her attention to her jam-making process. Yes, they were delivered earlier this evening. Oh, how beautiful! Hannah returned her hands to her pocket and yawned. I think I'm going to bed now. Very well. Hannah began to walk away, but her mother's words stopped her. Get a good rest. I'll try. Night. Hannah crept down the hall, hoping not to creak the floorboards as she walked past her younger brother's room. She slowly opened the door to her bedroom and closed it before turning the light on. Hannah took off her coat and placed it on the back of the chair near her desk, examining herself in the mirror atop it. She sighed. Her appearance was simple and not befitting of the description beautiful. Her lips were pale, and her blonde hair laid long and lank. Hannah despised the bumps on her face, wishing it to be smooth like the pretty girls in town. For, despite being 20 years of age, Hannah had never had a proposal for marriage from any of the men in town, and the odds of it ever happening were growing fewer as she aged. Her mother told her it was due to her father always being away, so the unmarried men decided the wait to ask permission not to be worth it. However, Hannah determined it was not of worth because of her simple looks and job at the bakery. No man wanted a woman who didn't have time to raise a family. But Hannah had to take care of her family, for the time, due to her father's travel affairs on official business. Also, her brother was too young to stay at the bakery alone. She didn't have the time nor energy to focus on a marriage. There were many reasons, she thought. Hannah shook her head as her low self-esteem took control once more, cutting away at her made-up excuses. There weren't other reasons. It had to do with her looks. She jumped onto her bed and stared at the ceiling, thoughts flooding her mind, wondering what she would do the next day. Perhaps hang around with Nina before work? Read another book on the history of Wyvernon according to modern scholars? Write another letter to her father? As she considered her options, she felt a strange sensation. Hannah shot up and peered out the window with a strong feeling that she was being watched by one on the other side of the glass. She couldn't see anything, or anyone for that matter, looking in at her. However, it's hard to see anything out of the window and into the night when inside of a lighted space. Hannah sprung from her bed, turned the light off, and swiftly jumped onto her bed once more. She pulled her knees up against her and peered out the window. Nothing. She let out a breath of relief. However, the feeling of being watched only slightly disappeared. Maybe she was paranoid from her feeling of uneasiness earlier in the night. The 3 individuals outside of the apothecary were up to no good, of that she was certain. And the way they glared at her, simply for looking in their direction, nope, no good. It sent a chill down her spine thinking about the incident. I'm overreacting, Hannah whispered to herself. She giggled and once again turned her eyes up to the ceiling, pushing her legs under a thin blanket and pulling it up to meet her. With eyes closed, Hannah rubbed her fingers against the interlocking threads, every soft fiber registering in her brain. The sensation calmed her. I'm sure they've been there before. I just didn't notice. It was just another day. When Hannah woke up the next morning, she discovered her blankets had fallen to the floor at some point in the night. She sat up and looked curiously at the mess, knowing herself to normally sleep as still as a corpse. Forcing herself not to think much of it, Hannah gathered the blankets and made her bed, flattening every wrinkle and bump that could be seen. She got ready for the day and headed to the kitchen to grab breakfast. Van, Hannah's younger brother, sat in a chair, feet dangling, eating fresh strawberry jam on bread before heading out. He raised his head as she entered. I'm going to the fields to play with Arthur and the others. I told Ma yesterday, but she probably forgot, he explained through a full mouth of food. Hannah raised her eyebrows and expressed a look of disgust. Manners? What? Never mind, Hannah replied, rolling her eyes. Here, Van said through another mouthful. He wiped his hands on his shirt and held up an envelope. Hannah quickly took it, a smile spreading across her face. The courier dropped it off this morning. Hannah began to open it while her brother fought to catch a glimpse. Who is it from? He asked. Probably our father. I've sent him tons of letters, but don't often get a reply. Maybe he finally got the chance to... Hannah's smile abruptly turned to a frown as she saw the royal crest on the page located in the top center, a snake wrapped about a crown. What is it? Van questioned, trying to act uninterested. The castle, Hannah answered. now wearing a confused expression. She couldn't decide whether to be disappointed or excited by the letter. At that moment, they heard a knock at the front door. Hannah placed the letter on the table next to Van, who promptly picked it up to read. Hannah opened the door to see her good friend, Nina, waiting on the other side. She was hopping up and down in place, with a wide grin cemented on her face. Her loose brown curls bounced as she did. Her eyes made the day appear brighter. She must have good news, Hannah thought. "Did you get your letter?" Nina excitedly asked, while waving her own in Hannah's face. Hannah leaned back and playfully batted Nina's hands away. Yes, I did," Hannah responded. "So, are we going dress shopping?" "For what?" Hannah asked. At this, Nina stopped bouncing up and down and crossed her arms. Her face grew serious. "Did you even read it?" "I skimmed." Nina released a dramatic sigh. Hannah turned to Van, who was staring at the pair, particularly Nina. Hannah felt in her pocket to ensure she had her keys and walked out the door. "I'm going out. Be sure to lock up when you leave," Hannah instructed Van. "Mm-hmm," he quietly answered. He scratched his head and turned away. As Hannah closed the door behind her, Nina tugged at her arm and let out an excited squeal. Hannah responded with a smile, for seeing Nina so happy gave her some happiness. They walked toward town, as they often did when with one another. The day was bright and warm. The sun continued to slowly stretch toward its peak, the wispy clouds scattered above. Many of the other children who lived in the residential area of town were playing outside with their friends and siblings. The older girls, those nearing adulthood and marrying years, sat in groups on the porches talking loudly and exclaiming about their invitations to the castle. Hannah sifted through her thoughts, trying to remember the contents of the letter. But the words were vacant as she read them, the disappointment of the letter not being from her father, the prominent thought to occupy her mind. Nina realized her friend's confusion. "Here," Nina said, pushing the letter toward Hannah. "I'm sure yours said the same thing. Every unmarried girl over 18 and under 30 years of age got one." Hannah carefully grabbed the letter and unfolded it. It read, "Dear Madam of Wickborough, due to the premature passing of our late king, Prince Daedalus Wyvern, the heir to the throne, is to be made King of Wyvernon. Due to the laws of our land, in order for the prince to achieve status as king, he must take one of Wyvernon's women as his wife. All unmarried ladies 18 through 30 years are eligible for the opportunity to marry fair Prince Daedalus Wyvern and make for him a fair queen and a fairer family. The selection will be held after a formal ball on Friday, August 21st. The prince himself will attend and choose between those present. The invitation is good for one person. No guests are permitted. The prince sends his thanks to those who have received these letters and taken time out of their busy lives to read them. Best wishes to you." The letter was signed Edgar Barron, Royal Advisor. Hannah handed the letter back to Nina, a forced grin on her face. Sensing Hannah's anxiety, Nina placed a hand on her shoulder and expressed a comforting look. She knew saying anything that went against Hannah's thoughts of herself would simply be denied, so she decided against speaking about the issue. "So, are we going dress shopping or not?" Hannah didn't answer, but stared at the ground. Nina shook her. "Hannah?" "Sorry, yes, let's do that," Hannah answered, looking up with a smile. Nina mirrored Hannah's expression, beginning to bounce up and down again. "I'm so excited!" Nina squealed. Her excited shrills caught the attention of those of the passerby. They turned their heads. Most of them assumed the reason to be the invitation, as most of the town's ladies reacted in a similar manner. Information traveled fast in a small, tight-knit community like Wickborough. Nina and Hannah reached the strip of markets in town. Down the way, Hannah could see the family bakery, customers always walking in and out. "Where should we go?" Nina inquired. "We could visit dazzling dresses, or maybe Fiora's formal." Nina continued to talk, but Hannah tuned her out. Her attention was pulled toward the apothecary. Though not as menacing in daylight, the area in front of the store remained barren. The ominous energy that emitted from the shop was enough to keep people away at all times. The 3 individuals from the night before were no longer there, rather replaced with a single person in a hooded emerald cloak. He leaned against the brick wall near the door, head turned toward the pavement. Hannah watched him through her peripheral vision, a feeling of familiarity present. The day was warm, so Hannah wondered why he would cover himself. She wondered why she felt he was a man to begin with. After all, he was completely concealed by the cloak. As Hannah observed the man, the hood slowly fell back, revealing a young man with long, silver hair pulled into a single braid, a penetrating stare, and subtle smirk. Hannah felt her face heat and quickly moved her eyes elsewhere. She felt a pressure on her shoulder and jumped. Her heart sank, but as she fell back into reality, she realized the ridiculousness of the dread she felt. Nina was the only one beside her. "Hannah, are you listening to me?" Nina asked in a concerned tone. Yeah, let's do that," Hannah responded, her eyes connecting with Nina's. Out of her peripheral vision, she saw the emerald-cloaked figure had vanished. "Which one? Dazzling dresses or Fiora's formal?" "Which one is the farthest from here?" "Fiora's." "Then let's start there. That way when we finish, we'll be closer to the bakery. I don't want to be late for work after all," Hannah responded. Nina's face appeared a bit twisted, but she reasoned through Hannah's explanation and figured it made sense. And even though she wished her friend would learn to relax for just one day, Nina nodded in acceptance of the plan. Hannah let out a breath of relief, happy to be getting away from the apothecary.